Aloha everyone, and welcome to another Carbon 60 video by me, Kay Elmer. And in this video I'd like to share with you some research on what we have learned about Carbon 60 since it became popular as a health supplement 3 years ago. If anyone who's taking C60 today, I hope you still remember that you're part of a human trial and there have been no published human studies. So come along with me and let's go through some of the research. Obviously, before we can jump in, we need to talk about some disclaimers. This material is for research purposes only. C60 is not approved for consumption by the FDA. You understand that consuming C60 is still experimental and you do so at your own risk. I don't have any stake in any C60 company or C60 product, and I do not get paid for making C60 videos. Now, I do want to make a note on source materials for this video. Normally, if you look at the video description, you'll see all of the links. I try to be very thorough, extremely transparent, share everything that I'm reading so that you can judge for yourself. However, there's so many studies in this video. What I've done is I basically have put them all in a Google directory, and I've given you a link to the directory so you can just go ahead and look for them yourself. So I'm not going to list them all out. They're just right there in the directory. So, knock yourselves out. Oh, I also did find a way to obtain the full study and not just the abstract. So all of the material is there and it's all in that directory for you. So let's get started. Before you can talk about what we have learned, I just want to do a brief history of C60 so that we're all on the same page as to where we're at. So for those of you who don't know, and this is kind of an interesting history, C60 was discovered in 1985 by a research team headed by a gentleman by the name of Harold Croteau, James Heath, and Richard Smalley. They discovered it. They were working in Rice University, and then 10 years later, much to everyone's surprise, and this is a very short time period for a Nobel Peace Prize in chemistry, they were awarded the prize because it was such a monumental find to actually discover this unique molecule, C60. Now, in that time period, I want to point out here something that was really important, is that just shortly after the discovery, there was the SES research was founded by Chris Burroughs and Robert Wong, in which they started to produce C60 en masse. In the original days, back in these days, C60 was produced in the lab at an extremely high cost. It was selling for like $6,000 a gram. So when SES was founded, they decided to make it, mass produce it, and then it became, and then they started feeding it to all the academia for studies as well as for commercial use. So the actual commercial production of C60 started with the founding of SES in 1991, a U.S. company. So that's when C60 actually started getting used purely for commercial use as an industrial lubricant. So then in 2003, a company in Japan called Vitamin C60 had started to look at some of the research that had been done since the discovery, and they discovered that the ROS sponge activity of C60 was valuable for cosmetic use. And what ROS stands for is reactive oxygen species, or free radicals. So because C60 has that very unique property in which it can basically sponge up free radicals, they decided to create a firm called Vitamin C60, and in 2003 launched and started selling C60, their own product that cosmetic companies were putting in as an ingredient to their products. A lot of you who use makeup and that sort of product, beauty products, cosmetics, you may not know, but you've probably been using products with C60 in it for a very long time. And so that's kind of what started there, was the cosmetic use of C60 started in 2003. And then came 2012. 2012 was a very remarkable year in the history of C60 because that was when the famous quote rat study was published. Now, it had actually started about 3 to 5 years earlier, and it was commissioned in the University of Paris. And the actual study itself was a LD50 study, and LD is lethal dose 50, meaning that it's a study to find out, because there was people using it commercially, people using it cosmetically, so there was lots of workers processing it. And so, from an OSHA standpoint, they wanted to know, hey, how much of this stuff is toxic, and in terms of people working with it and using it in industry. So they did an LD50 study in Paris, and they published the results in 2012. And this is what really started the interest in C60 from a health supplement use, because this study was about trying to, find out how many rats die if you give them too much C60. And what happened was, as you might know, is the rats didn't die. They flourished, and they lived 92% longer than the control group of rats not given it, which means basically their life was extended by 2 times. And then, and additionally to that, when they actually dissected these rats after the many years of the study, they discovered that they had absolutely no tumors, whereas the control group had lots of different health problems and so forth, dying of old age. But when they dissected these rats, when they finally passed away, and they actually had to eliminate a few at the end just to wrap up the study, these rats, their organs were in pristine condition. So that was a pretty amazing study. So when that study came out, then down here, 3 months, literally 3 months later, Carbon 60 Olive Oil Company was founded by Tom Martin, and he was the first individual to actually put C60 as a health supplement onto the market. And so in this time period right here was quite an amazing boom in terms of just the discovery. It was quite controversial at its time. It still is. But Tom Martin founded this company, and within 3 months he was producing C60 in olive oil to the exact specifications that the scientists had done it in Paris. And so then he started producing it, and then from there has been a huge small army of people who have decided to create C60 in oil products for the health supplement use. Now, right after that, in the same time period, in the 2012, there was a longevity forum, and it's kind of like a biohacker forum, and the people in this forum jumped onto the idea of C60 in oil because of this study and started making their own. They started buying from Tom and several others. Several meaning like a handful of other folks that were really one of the the groundbreakers in creating this product for health use. And the longevity biohackers were the first group of people to actually, the early adopters of C60 olive oil, and they were at it for like several years before the forum kind of just has, it's still out there, but it's very dead. I mean, you go check it, and there's like a post every couple of weeks or something. So it was at its peak. They did a lot of different personal testimonies, and everyone was trying it. That's where I got the idea for using a jar to make C60 oil. So in this forum, it's kind of like the original archive of the original group of people that started taking C60 oil for their health. And so this is where it started. And then in 2017, that's when it really took off. But I want to point out one thing in between. Was that in 2015, scientists had discovered C60 in outer space. They discovered that C60 is essentially a very common component of stellar dust, or what you would call, cosmic dust. And it's really remarkable that in this same little time period here, not only did they discover that there was incredible health benefits of C60, but also at the same time it discovered that it was not just an odd or very rare, substance or carbon allotrope on planet Earth, but it was actually found throughout the universe. So this is a very, very important step in the history of C60. Was in 2015, and it was discovered and proven that it existed in space, and it was actually space is full of C60. So now going back to 2017, I call it the old guy. Old guy goes on to Sarah Westall YouTube, and he basically shares this study of the rat study. This individual had about a 60,000 person following, and a lot of those people were really, really perked interest when they heard the story of the rat study. And so that's when it started. That group of people following the old guy on the Sarah Westall show really started, they basically, and if for those of you who were there at that moment, I was listening to that video right when it came out. Within 24 hours, the followers of this person basically bought out the entire market. Every single producer of C60 oil was bought out. That's how small the market was within a couple of days. And so that started basically the bull run on C60 as a health supplement. So now what happened since then? It's 2020. And it's 3 years later. So that's what this video is for. Let's talk about some of the research. And so down here, of course, that's the rest of us joined in. So you're here now. It's 2020. C60 is still used commercially as an industrial lubricant. It's still used in cosmetics. And it's been 3 years since it really got popular in the health supplement industry. So let's talk about the very first thing that's so important about all of this is that the reason they did the C60 study in Paris was to find out, again, how much C60 does it take to kill you? And they discovered it doesn't kill you. They couldn't kill the rats with it. And that was the study called The Prolongation of Lifespan of Rats by Repeated Oral Administration of C60 Fullerene. This is the pivotal study that started it all. And what's so important about the idea of C60 being toxic is that one study does not define anything. One study is like, it's basically like a scout ant. It finds something out there in the universe that you want to take a harder look at, and if you cannot duplicate a study, then the results are inconclusive, and you can't validate them and so forth. So what's really important about the last 3 years is, has the idea or the discovery and the results of that original 2012 study, has it been validated? Is C60 truly toxic or not? And so I want to point out that there's been several other studies that have been done that have proven it is not toxic. And I think that's the most important thing that I could share with you today in terms of what have we learned in the last 3 years, is that C60 is not toxic. Now, a Japanese scientific team actually did another study. They used mice and they put C60 in corn oil, and that study is called the Subacute Oral Toxicity Study with Fullerene C60 in rats. I'm sorry, they use rats. And they found there was no toxicity as well, and that's happened in the last 3 years. And then again, then you've got the Live Pet, which is a spearheaded commercial team by a gentleman called Ian Mitchell, and they sell a product called Companion C60 for pets. And they started their market with a pet product. And they went looking at C60 and they have a full-on commercial lab. These are not entrepreneurials. These guys are, laboratory folks, and they work with universities. And so Ian Mitchell and his team decided they wanted to produce a product for pets using C60, and the product's called Live Pet. And so what they did was they actually did a study, as they call it. They call it the general properties of C60 and their safety assessment in animals. And what they did in that study was they administered C60 in oil to 15 dogs over a long period of time. So they took it from rats to now they're using dogs, and they did this study, and then they had the dogs assessed, not dissected or anything like that, but they had the dogs fully assessed. They tested their urine, they tested all these blood samples and everything, and discovered that there was absolutely no detriments to any of their bodily functions or anything about the dogs, and all 15 dogs thrived. And so this was another study showing that C60 did not have any toxic results in mammals. And then lastly, what's really kind of the most important, I think, when you talk about validation of the body study, which is what the rat study is called, is that Live Pet under Ian Mitchell, he actually also did an LD50 study in using P53 knockout rats instead of Wilstall rats. And so the French use a certain kind of lab rat, and the only difference that Ian had done when he did his study on rats was he just used a different type of lab rat, a certified lab rat. And the lab rats, are basically genetically disposed to die in 2 years and develop cancer and die off. Okay, that's what the rats he used. And so he did a full-on laboratory study of these P53 knockout rats, giving them C60 exactly like the body study, the rat study, and they all flourished as well. And so his study, and he's come out, and this is the only problem, he didn't publish his studies because he's a commercial guy. He's not an academic. And so he didn't publish his study, but he talks a lot about his study. And Ian Mitchell is by far one of the foremost experts and just professionals in the industry when it comes to C60. Everyone I know really respects Ian. And so he talks about his study in several of his interviews, in which he basically comes out and says that his results were within a 97% variance or match, okay, to the body results. I mean, in other words, his study came out with the same exact conclusion with an error rate of 3%. So he proved it to himself, and then he launched his product in terms of, is C60 toxic? Can C60 help in terms of radical oxygen species scavenger/sponge? So this is what's really important here, is the idea that C60 is not toxic, and there's been other studies since then that have shown and proven that. Okay, so what's also interesting in the last 3 years is that there's been other individuals, and here's one of the videos that just came out on July 23rd this year. This is what I really like about C60, and I'm very I'm very tied into the C60. I look at all the studies. I watch every video that comes out about it. It's just one of my interests. And so there's more and more third-party folks that have nothing to do with C60, and they just review it because it's just something they look at as part of their YouTube channel. And so this Dr. Brad Stanfield recently came out with a video where he evaluated C60 independently, and he basically came out and said, hey, yeah, it's got some positive benefits, but he identified some potential risks. And I really welcome other third parties taking a look at C60 because they look at it with a different set of eyes because they're not involved in C60 at all. And so, but I want to point out that there are potential risks, and he did find potential risks. And so let's talk about those potential risks because it's part of what we have learned in the last 3 years. So one of the things that he pointed out, and this is what's very specific in his video, we'll get into the benefits later, but talk about the potential risk because, we are the human trial. If you're taking it, you're part of the human trial. There's been no human study done. There's supposedly some studies being done now, but it takes a long time because humans don't live like 2 years, right? And so the idea is that it's so important to take a look at what other people are doing in terms of how they view things. And so here's his thoughts on the potential risk. And so this is what he pointed out in his assessment, whereas that he basically said, hey, there's a potential for DNA damage. And that was a study based on water. It was water-soluble C60 that they tested on flies. And he also said that it was C60 can turn into an oxidant versus an antioxidant. Now, antioxidants are good for you. Some oxidants are also good for you, but mostly not good for you. Okay, and when it's exposed to light. Now, on that point alone, C60, we've known since beginning that C60, everybody that uses C60 or sells C60, they tell you keep it dark. That's why C60 it always is sold in a bottle that's dark. And if you make your own C60, you're always told, stir in the dark, keep the thing dark, keep it away from air. But so I'm not really going to go into the whole oxidant issue when exposed to light because that's been so proven that it just doesn't need to be repeated more than a bunch of times, right? It's so proven that it's not even an issue. Yeah, don't expose it to light and you're fine. But the whole issue about the DNA damage, well, we'll chat about that in a second. And then he also mentions that there's solvents. And in fact, to quote Dr. Stanfield in his video, he says that, hey, you've got no idea, these are the potential risks, no idea that carbon-60 has actually, how the carbon-60 has actually been produced. You don't know what form it's in and whether or not there's any leftover solvents. And that's true. So let's talk about that because, he brings out a very important point of what we have learned. So, one of the things about solvents, and I want to point this out, and I did a full video on this if you want to go look at it. In terms of solvents, I did a full video on this where I pointed out 2 separate studies and went through the manufacturing process of C60 so people could understand, how this could possibly happen. But in these 2 studies here, the first study, solvent molecules in C60, they discovered that the evolution from the material of species produced by solvents can be seen at temperature definitely higher than the one used in the usual removal annealing, showing that this is not enough to produce solvent-free fullerenes. And what that study means is that most C60 is there's multi-step process, and the very last process before they'll sell it to you or put it into oil is that they vacuum bake it for 24 hours at around 400 degrees. C60 actually will sublimate or turn into gas at 600 degrees Celsius, but at 400 degrees Celsius, that's what they bake it at, and they basically will then bake it for so long that supposedly, the solvents that they use to process it to separate it out from other fullerenes is supposedly going to be removed, okay? But this study found that it doesn't. It doesn't get removed, that there's still going to be solvents left in the C60, trapped in the C60 crystals. Okay, this other study called Evolution of Species During Thermal Sublimation of C60 found that the solvent molecules were found to be absorbed at interfaces of the microcrystals of C60, which is what I just said, and sintering of the microcrystals on heating is assumed to be responsible for entrapping some of the solvent molecules in the sample. This may explain the difficulty of removal of the solvents from fullerene samples. So what they found was that when you actually put it in the oven to get rid of the solvents, right, you create the little, you trap the molecules of solvents within the molecule crystals or clumps of C60 crystals. And so that, in other words, these 2 studies said, hey, no matter if you bake it or not, if you bake it, it will still have solvents remaining. And so now you'll notice that there are some C60 companies out there. There's a very few of them, but they're actually taking, because of this discovery, they're taking the C60, oven baking it multiple times, and then testing it to make sure, and pulverizing it to break up those crystals, then testing it and baking it. I'm not sure exactly what they're doing, because no one will share their secrets, but they have to be multiply baking it, pulverizing it, and then of course they test it before they use it, and they test it to make sure that it is free of solvents down to a acceptable level of parts per billion. So, and then they call that solvent free, which is, that's a whole nother subject, but whether or not it's truly solvent free and so forth. But there are companies out there that are actually taking multiple extra steps, which does drive up their price, because it's a lot of extra work, but they're going out of their way now to go far beyond what the C60 production methodology is prior to this. Other folks, if are not, unless they're, and it's something that if you can tell if they're bragging about it. Okay, that's as simple as that. But the bottom line about solvents is that C60 is not solvent free unless you go through all of that extra process, or you buy a version of the C60 that never touched solvents to begin with, called sublimated C60. All right, enough about that. The whole video, I made 2 whole videos about this, and I'll just jump on to the next subject. So let's talk about the DNA damage claim by Dr. Branfield. Okay. 2 studies on that. I went looking. First of all, I looked at the study that he claimed, that he mentioned, and his study basically is reconciling the controversial data on the effects of C60 fullerene at the organismal, and molecular levels using as a model of Drosophila melanogaster. Okay, that's a fly. All right, and they've discovered that the water-soluble pristine C60 fullerene at the concentration of 20, I forgot what that one, and 40 milliliters per liters, leads to the activation of the gene in the fly larva, salivary glands, which can indicate higher levels of DNA damage. So what? They put C60 in water, and they gave it to some fly larvae, and the fly larvae developed DNA damage. Okay, now another one that I went out looking for in a study called Genotoxicity of Colloidal Fullerene C60. This other study also basically backed up this one, that C60 will cause DNA damage, and they discovered that our data suggests that aqua C60 has DNA damage potential, and that DNA damage is not due to covalent DNA adjunct formation by C60 itself. So what's really important about this is it's C60 in water. C60 is not water soluble. Are you taking water soluble C60? No, you're taking C60 lipofullerene C60, i.e. dissolved in oil. So when anyone's talking about DNA damage, I have not found, and I went looking for hours to find any study that was C60 in oil / DNA damage. I could not find them. The damage of DNA claims for C60 are aqua or water-soluble C60, and that is not what we are doing in terms of the health supplement of C60. So this claim doesn't hold up against, but it's what we learned, right? But it does not hold up, as something that the health supplement industry should be worried about, because we're not doing it that way. It's very important that everyone understand, how they were doing it versus how we are doing it, i.e. taking C60. So the other thing that's so important, and I want to make this point really strong, and I want to reiterate what I just said. I went looking for, it's funny, right? Scientists do studies and produce studies, right? And then there's other scientists who do reviews of other scientists' studies. It's kind of like this big circle, right? And so there's studies out there about C60 studies, right? And so I went and looked for those and said, hey, what do you guys think about, all of these discrepancies where, you got DNA damage by water soluble and, blah, blah, blah. And so here you go. Here's 2 different studies I found. One's called The Comparative Toxicity of C60 Aggregates Towards Mammalian Cell Rolls of the, and I'm not trying to pronounce this word, decomposition. So what they discovered was that thus, the role of NC60 in the cellular responses is likely not due to the direct effect of the C60 material surface on the cells, but related to the conversion of the THF into a toxic byproduct during the preparation of suspension. All right? The other study that I found, a study of studies called The Biological Effects of C60 Fullerene Revealed with Bacterial, Biosensor, Toxic, or rather Antitoxin, that study discovered that their exact action on cells strongly depends on many factors, including experimental conditions, preparations, the solvents used, which have contributed to the confusion regarding their safety and possible health benefits. And that's my point. And here are studies that back up my point. It all comes down to what? What was, if you read a study, there's a section called Materials and Methods, and it's basically, the details. The devil is in the details. So what did you do? How did you do it? What did you use? Right? What did you, and how, everything, every aspect of the study. And so when we say, what have we learned about C60? I want to know, because I take copious amounts of C60 in oil, and also I take it topically. I want to know, what is it doing to me in the form that I'm doing it in? And so what we've learned, right, is that, any claim that it does is DNA damage, well, C60 is not water soluble, and so, and so basically, don't ever take C60, put it in water and drink it. Okay, bad. And then there's heavy use of solvents. You read some of these studies, and it's unbelievable that they'll just have all of these solvents that they're using, and different, different types of food additives that are used as, every water is a solvent. So there's tons of different solvents. And so if there's one that's like in food that people use in food, in the food industry, they'll use that as a medium for putting in C60. And then there's studies where they'll take it and they'll just basically, I've seen studies or read studies where they'll have the lab animals, inhale C60 like dust. I've seen them where they inject it into their abdominal cavity. I've seen C60 studies where they'll just inject it into embryos, fish embryos and bacteria, It's like, okay, so what have we learned? Well, we learned that you do all that stuff and it has nothing to do with us, humans, taking lipofullerene C60 in oil. It just doesn't. You can't compare apples to oranges. So what are the weighted factors that are the most important thing when we're doing a research study on what have we learned about C60 in oil, lipofullerenes? Well, I want to just say that based on the studies of studies and based on just the common sense, that there are weighted factors. And then what's really important about what we have learned are studies that basically are going to look at how we are processing C60, taking C60. And so what it really comes down to is I kind of just have gotten to the point where if it's not a study that they have lipofullerene C60 in oil, and not just any kind of oil, preferably olive oil. Okay, there's a few other oils, but there's even that Japanese study, they did it in corn oil. Well, most of corn is GMO, and so you've got all these different factors. So if you just stick with olive oil, but not just any olive oil, it's organic, cold pressed, EEOV or whatever. Rachel Ray, right? EEV, so something. Anyway, but the whole idea, though, is that's the best, highest quality. Some of the best producers of C60 oil on the market, they have contracts with farms directly, and they cold ship the olive oil to you. I have a friend of mine that, was in the shipping business for several years, and we talked about it one time, and he said, yeah, and those containers, those big Matson, containers, that the temperature can get up to 125, sorry, not 150, but about 125 degrees in the summer, being shipped around or in trucks. So, a lot of times and this is true if you study the olive oil industry, like 99% of olive oil on the market's not real olive oil. It's just, it's fake olive oil. Also that a majority of that or a large portion of the olive oil that you'll see on the store shelves are already partially rancid because they've been in transport, subjected to heat, subjected to light, sitting on the shelf. So it really matters that it's the highest absolute quality of oil. And then also olive oil has been found to be the absolute best oil to use for C60 saturation. So it's so important that when you look at studies to understand what we have learned, that we focus in on the fact that it's a lipofullerene in a very healthy oil. Lipofullerene means that it's been completely dissolved into the oil. It's been formed into what they call liposomes, and each separate molecule at a one molecule level, okay, not crystalline clusters of C60, but one molecule is so important, and it's wrapped around by fatty lipids, and it creates what they call a liposome. You can see them under a microscope, and that when you filter your oil after you're done making it, and I have made I don't know, 3 years at this point, I've made gallons and gallons and gallons of this stuff. But you filter it through a very fine filter, and you filter out anything larger than 0.22 microns, and you get oil. You get nothing else in the oil. It's just oil. It's darker now because it's got all those lipofullerenes in it, but it's just the smallest particulate size, which is the next point here. Some of the studies I've read, they've got particulate sizes 130 nanometers all the way up to like 600 nanometers. And that's really important because think about it. A C60 molecule is 1 nanometer. You could line up 100,000 C60 molecules side by side, and it would equal the width of the common human hair. Okay, that's how small it is. So if you're taking C60 in chunks, crystalline chunks, as noted before, those crystalline chunks contain solvent molecules, then it's not healthy for you. So when you're looking at studies that say, hey, you know what? I look at studies. I want to know it's lipofullerene in a healthy oil. The particulate size was, hey, you made it, you filtered it, 0.22 microns, just like the rat study did, and also the way that the C60 oil was given to the animals. Okay, very important because there's all these different ways, like I said, through shots, through inhalation, but it's got to just be through oral administration, not forced feeding using gavages. Okay, and then the other part, which is common sense, which is we're not flies, we're not bacteria. Well, we have a lot of it in us, but we're mammals, and so it's got to be a million study. And so when you look at these weighted factors and say, yeah, based on these criteria, okay. And the results from when you look at a study using this criteria and the methodology of the body study, then we can really, really, really get down to what is the results, what is really happening now with C60 as a health supplement. So let's talk about what happens when you look at that in that way. So what I did was, and this took a lot of time. This research was a month in the making. I had to go through dozens and dozens of studies and weed out all these different ways that people did C60 studies because their results to me are not relevant to what's important to us, which is, hey, like I just did. And so after going through dozens of studies, for brevity, I found 5 out of a couple of dozen. And it took a long time because I have to read these things, okay? And so I want to share with you what I found. Now, I found 5 studies, and for sake of brevity, I'm not going to go through them like the other ones, but they're in that directory, okay? And I just summarized it here. Well, when you go exactly to these weighted factors, so that you want to know exactly what the results are studies using this, then this is what's pretty interesting. Out of 24 studies roughly, okay, I only found 5 that actually did it that way, that actually used lipofullerenes, blah, 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 okay? And so now one of them had bad results in terms of negative results, and in terms of it negatively affected the microbiota, and it also had an effect on glucose, and which raised insulin resistance. And I think that there's the one study now, and I think that there's a lot more research needs to be happening here because they did find that it does have some negative effects. And so it's a great study, and so I think there's a lot more research has to be done. Remember, this is all about science. And it's not good or bad results, or in context, okay. But the idea is that, hey, you know what? Somebody's found something that it doesn't do great, and there's all these people out there selling C60 always saying, it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Well, let's level set that. It's not. We still have a lot to learn. And here's one study I think, and it came out in 2019. In this time period, what we have learned is that, hey, it's not all unicorns and rainbows. There are some discoveries here that are finding out that it does cause some problems. So we need to look a lot more into that. Is this the end all thing and everybody that should stop taking it? Of course not, because when you look at some of the other studies, 4 out of 5 that I found, and this is all completely random, unbiased, okay, was I found a study using the same weighted criteria where it's very positive for the liver and brain, very positive. Another study that was very positive for people with diabetes and its effect on the liver, very positive results on apoptosis and autophagy flux, and another one that was very good for kidneys. And so the point that I'm trying to make here is when you weed out all the stuff that has just really it's not relevant, and you look at just the weighted factors, 4 to 5 results of studies just in that area were very positive, and one that wasn't. And so, more research needs to be done. But so far, looking pretty good. When you take a look at the research of all of this, then I kind of did a pros and cons. So I just want to summarize it. The pro in what we have learned. What have we learned? Hey, well, you know what? C60 is not toxic. You know, C60 is, and these studies, by the way, if you read these studies, they all confirm all of this information, that it is a very exceptional reactive oxygen species sponge slash scavenger. It does mop it basically, and I'll get into that in another video, but how it does that. But it's just, it's exceptional as an antioxidant. In fact, the body study claimed that C60 was 172 times more potent as an antioxidant than vitamin C. And what's interesting is that Ian Mitchell's study on dogs discovered that he discovered it was actually 250 times more potent as an antioxidant than vitamin C. So, you know, it's well, you know, like I just said, it's very good at being an antioxidant. And also, you know, like I just said, it supports liver and brain function. It supports autophagy and autophagy. It supports kidneys. And then there's other information out here, and I can go on and on and on. But there's been more videos, more testimonies, more studies where there's it supports macular degeneration. In other words, it relieves it, if not cures it. It's extremely good at anti-inflammatory and more. And I'm trying to keep this video as short as possible because I could go on for an hour or more, and I don't want to do that. But there's so much more on the pro side in the last 3 years from just the testimonials and also some of the people doing experiments. People, not scientist people. Okay, so there's a lot more about the pros of C60 as a health supplement. It's the only reason that after 3 years I still take it daily. Okay, and I read all of these things. I'm not put off by the fact that there's one study that says it's not that great. I think there needs to be more research, and that's that. And so now the cons, right? Well, well, we know it's a pro-oxidant we're supposed to like. Bottom line, keep your stuff dark. There are solvents in there, okay? And then I get into that. I got 2 videos on that. Parts per billion. Are people really worried about solvents? Well, if you really are worried, then you really need to buy a C60 quote solvent free, and only buy it if it's been made with sublimated C60. Personally, I don't worry this much about it because there's so much pollution and chemicals and blah 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 in our environment that to me it's a minor thing. But there are people who are very sensitive to solvents, and when they take a non-solvent free C60 oil product, there have been lots of reports of people getting ill from it because they're sensitive to solvents. I'm not one of those people, so I don't have a problem with it. But I do make sure that I buy from a very reputable company in terms of the raw C60 that I use. I don't buy commercial products. Okay, now, and also, of course, that study about microbiota and glucose, and then the dosages are questionable. Okay, now, so, talking about dosages are questionable, I want to point out one more study they found, and then lastly, of course, there's more to be discovered. And then, let's talk about that, too. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about dosages and extended lifespan. One of the things that I thought was so interesting, and just before I was about to make this video, right in the process, like I said, it took me a month to put this together. Right in the middle of this month, November 3rd, this girl who runs the Sheekey Science Show put out a video covering this one study. And it was pretty interesting. It's a very interesting study. It came out in 2020. It came out the last week of October. And right now it's like November 14th. So only like a couple of weeks ago, this study got published. The study is called C60 in olive oil causes light-dependent toxicity and does not extend lifespan in mice. Read that. Does not extend lifespan in mice. I thought, wow, that's interesting. So the point that this study was made, and this lady or girl made a video about the study, was that her, basically, it's using the weighted factors. It's exactly the way they did it, exactly as the rat study. They used mice instead. And their conclusions in this study was that it had a light-dependent toxicity. Well, as I mentioned earlier, yeah, keep it dark. We know that, so that's not a surprise. But it also found out that it does not extend the lifespan in mice. So they basically did the same thing as the rats, except the mice didn't live longer. That's kind of interesting, right? But you know what? When you're reading this study, there's a little gem in this study that I think is so important to mention to all of you. So one of the things that this study discovered is they went and they bought different C60 commercial products, and they evaluated them. And in this study, and I want to quote this, and they came out with their conclusion. This is in the study, and it says, commercial C60 olive oil has unpredictable concentrations and activity. We performed an HPLC, that's a high-performance liquid chromatography study on the samples and found a notable increase in purity peaks in the commercial samples. Again, with HPLC, we measured the concentration of C60 in each sample and compared it to the claimed concentration on the label. We again found remarkable variability in C60 concentration and in deviation from the stated concentration. I think that's this. You know what? This is a gem. It's the first study that I've seen, an official study that I've seen, where somebody went out and bought some commercial products and actually said, "Hey, is the label accurate?" Right? Because none of this is regulated by the FDA, so that you can whatever you got on the label, you know, it's not you're not regulated to have to prove it, right? Or for it to be accurate. Okay, and so. This study actually points out that they discovered, and they only did 4, so let's be honest, okay? They only did 4 products. But here's the study. They found that the lowest concentration of C60 in one commercial product was 0.57 milligrams per milliliter, and they found another one that was 1.4 milligrams per milliliter. Now, the rat study, which is the benchmark for everybody that sells this stuff, the rat study, if you follow exactly the way they did it, is the benchmark is 0.8 milligrams per milliliter of C60 in oil. It's specifically olive oil in this case. All right? And so why is this so important? Well, if you look at this range between 4 separate products, the variance is 145%. It's huge. It is huge. That means the standards for producing C60 oil in the commercial and for commercial sale is all over the map. 145% variance between low and high is unbelievably high. That's a huge variance, okay? And the second thing is that, well, you guys and myself, I'm not out to supplement on olive oil. I'm out to supplement on C60. So try to imagine that if you bought one product and you thought you're taking the regular dose of C60, and you bought this other product and it's literally 3 times as much. Almost 3 times as much C60s in it. So when it comes to dosages, the con here on the C60 and what we have learned because of this incredible study, and again, one study does not, make everything, but I'll get into that in a second. But it's definitely a con because the dosages are questionable. Are you really getting the amount of C60 you think you are, right? Because you're not paying to buy oil. If you wanted to drink oil, you just go to your grocery store and buy oil and drink it. It's very expensive. It is really expensive. So how much are you taking? And that's what this study comes out. It says, well, it's pretty questionable at this point. Now, has there been any other studies that kind of even looked at this little point here? This whole dosages are questionable. Well, yes, I want to point out that there are 2. On the Longevity Forum, those guys back in the day, they all kind of got it. They did a crowdsourcing thing where they all found a lab that would test it for them, and then a whole bunch of them started sending them, products that they had bought from different places, and they only ended up with 3 different products at the time because that was like back in the ancient days of C60, right? And they did actually evaluate 3 separate different products, and it's on the forum somewhere, in the Longevity Forum, and they found that they had a huge range of difference between, the bottom number and the top number as well. And then also, if you're familiar with SES Research, as I just mentioned, Chris Burris, one of the founders, he actually did a study himself where he bought several commercial products. He talked about it in one of his videos, which I can't find yet, but I remember him talking about it in a video where he said that SES went and took a look at a bunch of different commercial products, and they also found a large variance in saturation in terms of the amount of C60 in the oil. So it is definitely a con. And Chris Burrs, by the way, is one of the founders of SES and very reputable. So just like Ian Mitchell. So when you talk about dosages are questionable, it is definitely a con in the current world of C60 health supplements because you don't really know when people look at these products how much C60 is really in there. Does it map to the label? And so, how do you counter that? Well, you make your own. I make my own. I don't worry about it. Or you go with some of the very well-established C60 companies that measure it, test it, and then when they put it on the label, they know it's correct because they went and put it through an HPLC analysis, and they know that their end product is actually what it says it is. Okay, so that's what's really important. But right now, there's so many commercial products out there, and it's been proven now. I would say that's been proven to a point that dosages are questionable. And then, of course, there's more to be discovered. So again, just another reminder that we are the human trial. Okay, there's never been a published trial, like I said. So if you're taking C60 oil, you are participating in a human trial, and right now the pros definitely outweigh the cons. I am very, very much, after doing this research for a month, very convinced that it's the best thing for me, and I continue to take a lot of it, as I said. And then lastly, but does it extend lifespan in humans? Really, does it extend lifespan in humans? You've got all these studies up here. You've got the Paris study, and you've got the live pet study that basically backed it up, saying, yeah, it does extend lifespan in rats. And then you've got this study that says it doesn't do that in mice. So does it extend lifespan in humans? Question mark, question mark. It's going to take a long time before we actually know it. Is that a reason you should stop taking it? Or maybe for you guys marketing this stuff, maybe you should temper your little, verbiage on your websites, because in reality, we don't know yet, because it definitely didn't do that for mice. So would that do it for humans? What's the difference? I don't know. A lot more studies to be done. But the point I want to make, the pros outweigh the cons, and that's what we have learned in C60 in the last 3 years. So I want to say thank you for watching my video. I hope that I make these videos because I'm really curious. I want to learn, and I learned 3 years ago when I started my channel that other people like to hear about what I'm learning. So that's what I'm doing. I'm researching and I'm studying and I'm sharing what I learn, at no cost to you, and I don't make anything off of it. I just want to say thank you for your time. Thank you for watching this video. I hope it was educational for you. Now, if you want to learn more about C60, I have a huge library of information about it over on my blog called the Tinkers Academy. To get there, you just type in tinkers.academy in your URL window on your browser. It'll take you right to my blog, and go to the C60 page. Tons of information, and I've categorized all of my different videos. And I never thought 3 years ago that I could make over 30 videos about one molecule, but I did. And so there's a lot. I categorize everything and organize it all nicely on my blog, and there it's called the Tinkers Academy. Also, we have a C60 chat group on Telegram that just talks about C60, making C60, the market, and so forth. And you can go ahead and click the link below in the video description and come join. And if you got questions about C60, about how to make C60, come on over and join the group and ask away. So again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate your interest, and I really truly appreciate the positive comments and your kind words that you share with me. So thank you so much. Lastly, before I go, this is part one. There is going to be a part two. I didn't want to make, this is already almost 50 minutes, but I had so much content and that I want to share with you a part two on more of what we have learned. Let's talk about the C60 hydrogen connection, C60 oil production methods, the product evolution, and then also where do we go from here? And we, because we've learned a lot. So I have a what we have learned about C60 part two coming up. I don't know when, soon, hopefully, but that's what's coming up for part two, and I hope you do have a chance to jump in and watch that when you do. So again, thank you so much, and aloha. Have a great day.